Hey class, I chose Australia as my country since it's a place I've always wanted to visit. I chose this country because of the uniqueness of the wildlife, the sea life, beaches, architecture, and to learn a little more about a place I'd like to see one day. What comes to mind when you think of Australia? For me, my first vision was kangaroos laying on a beautiful beach picture above. But the country is a lot more, and each territory is different depending on its geographic region. But most of the population does live around the coastlines. Instead of me trying to describe the country or famous places, I'd like to warm you up with a short 1 minute video on the next slide to give you a visual perspective on the native landscape, architecture, wildlife, and sea life. This video shows various diversity of wildlife and sea life native to the country, but it also combines the unique architecture shown in Sydney. Alright, for the agenda, I'll be discussing where Australia is geographically located, which ties into the foodways and local cuisine. We'll talk about the language and dialect and how it was derived by the Aborigines and British settlers. Next, we'll discuss the religion in the outback, and I've also researched some interesting facts and information about the country that I saved for the end. So, for the location, Australia, obviously, you guys know, is located between the South Pacific and Indian Ocean, just south of India, Indonesia, and Thailand. The island of Tasmania lies due south, just a small island down there, with New Zealand to the east. Australia is the sixth biggest country in the world, roughly the size of the United States, as you can see on the right there, that country, orange and green, that overlaps it. Even though it's surrounded by water, it's not defined as an island because it is defined as a continent, making it the smallest continent in the world. The country is comprised of 7 territories. The mainland consists of Western Australia, Northern Territory, South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria, which is located on the southeastern corner. The islands of Tasmania and Papua New Guinea are located to the south and north of the mainland. New South Wales to the southeast is where the largest city of Sydney is located, not to be confused with the capital city of Canberra. You may be wondering why the flag looks British. The Union Jack in the upper left corner is the flag of Great Britain and an obvious symbol of Australia's connection to Great Britain after they discovered it in 1770. On the right side of the flag you can see the Southern Cross. This is a constellation that is visible in the southern hemisphere. It was an important orientation point for sailors. Nowadays, you're likely to find many an Aussie man with a Southern Cross tattoo. Finally, in the bottom left side, there's the Commonwealth Star. The Commonwealth Star has 7 points for Australia's states and territories. Australians enjoy a huge range of food reflecting the country's cultural diversity. Southern Europe has combined with Asia and the Pacific for new flavors and tastes. Italian, Chinese, Indonesian, Japanese, Greek, Thai, Malay, French, and Vietnamese restaurants are common, particularly in the metro city areas. Middle Eastern flavors are also rapidly emerging, with Moroccan and Lebanese flavors being used with local ingredients in mainstream cooking. Oceanic cuisine is pictured at the top, showcasing much of what Melbourne offers at local restaurants. Bottom left shows traditional Australian snacks, while the bottom right shows a traditional Australian meat pie. Traditional Australian food found on the continent is known as bush tucker. Meat entrees featuring kangaroo, buffalo, crocodile, and emu can often be found on local menus. The meat pie, located in the bottom right of the slide, depicts a flaky pie filled with native meat and tomato sauce on the top. Historically, there has never been a cuisine typically regarded as authentic Australian. Instead, the food here has evolved with the distinct layers of flavors each new culture has added. Oceanic seafood is popular and also influenced menus in places like Melbourne. The Aborigines initially inhabited this continent. Their language is known as Creole, which now consists of over 300 dialects. They were noted for naming the iconic laughing kookaburra bird, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. They originally thought it was an evil bird by the way it laughed. They now only make up 1% of the nation's 22 million in population. James Cook from Great Britain discovered Australia in 1770. They began to use this land to house criminals and prisoners from Europe. They later sold Australia and in doing so killed thousands of the Aborigines. The distinct modern Australian dialect and sound of the way they command the English language comes from combining the British, Irish, and Aborigine dialects. Metro areas and bush areas have slightly different sounds to their dialect and accents due to the influence of British and Irish in larger metro cities. These cities still have a strong focus on schooling and proper English. A good example is comparing native Australian stars like Crocodile Hunter Steve Irwin or Crocodile Dundee's Paul Hogan to that of the more refined English accents of Nicole Kidman or Hugh Jackman. On the left you see Steve Irwin and Paul Hogan, the stereotypical bushman that links back to the days of the Aborigines, pictured left center. On the right you see Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman, which have become very famous, but appear to take after their English predecessor James Cook, who discovered the continent 250 years ago from Britain, pictured right center. I'll click on their speaker icon so you can hear their accents, see if you can detect the difference in how it's affected their culture. Here's Steve Irwin, Crocodile Hunter.
Oh, crikey!
Okay, here's the Crocodile Dundee star, Paul Hogan.
Yeah, I was raised by the local tribe. I asked one of the tribal elders one day when I was born, and he said, in the summertime.
Okay, here's Nicole Kidman.
You never change from what you were at school. All of those things that you had going on at school, just you carry them with you.
And lastly, Hugh Jackman.
I get back to Australia. I will be there on the 20th of
Wait,
December,
you do what
middle
is
of
it called?
summer.
Hot
What?
Christmas? What do you call it?
Well, it is hot.
Yeah.
We just call it Christmas. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Australia's major religion is Christianity, from its English roots, of course. The major denominations are similar to the U.S. They include Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, Eastern Orthodox, Baptist, and Lutheran. A 2016 census showed that 52% of the country practices Christianity, while 30% has no religious affiliation. The remaining 18% is split between non-Christian religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. Christianity came to Australia with the first British settlers on the First Fleet. Of the convicts and settlers, most were members of the established Church of England and Ireland, with lesser numbers of nonconformist Protestants, Catholics, and other faiths. The influence of Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism represents religious cultures that stem from regions nearby, like India and the Middle East. The laughing kookaburra was named by the Aborigines to mean laughing jackass. In their primitive belief of spirits, they thought the bird was evil. The kookaburra went on to become a national icon by broadcasting on radio as a bird named Jacko. The audible laughing noise has been used in many movies with jungle scenes, like Jurassic Park. by Danish architect Jorn Utzon, the Sydney Opera House is one of the most iconic pieces of architecture in the country. The project took 14 years and $102 million as it was vastly more complicated to build from the outlandish first cartoon sketch of the exterior. Utzon would later quit the project as pressure from politicians were mounting about the cost and estimation of completion. While the cost and time of construction went way over the 6-year, $7 million budget, the government made the money back in the Opera House's earnings in just a few years after opening. It is now a huge tourist attraction that rings in over $100 million a year. The building was opened in 1973 in Sydney Harbor and boasts a 2,700-seat concert hall, 3 theaters housing over 2,500 seats, a 400-seat auditorium, 2 recording studios, an outdoor forecourt utilizing the monumental steps as seating for a wide variety of events. One of the things I found very interesting while researching the structure was the Vivid Symphony Annual Festival of Light, Music, and Ideas that is shown on the right. This festival takes place in the city of Sydney, but the centerpiece is the immersive light projections on the sides of the Opera House. This can be seen from the harbor itself or anywhere on the harbor mainland. I've been to a coral reef in Roatan, Honduras, which is a 3-mile island to the north of Honduras. However, after researching the Great Barrier Reef, I did not realize the magnitudes or the size, nor did it encompass islands and other things like deep coral coves. The Great Barrier Reef is the world's largest coral reef system, composed of over 2,900 individual reefs and 900 islands stretching over 2,300 kilometers over an area of approximately 344,000 square kilometers. The reef is located in the Coral Sea off the coast of Queensland, Australia. It's essentially that entire blue area to the east side of Queensland on the picture. I got a short video on the next slide to wrap this presentation up that describes the reef much better than words can.
Reefs are often referred to as the rainforests of the oceans. They're home to more than 1 million species, including 1/4 of the world's fish, but they occupy less than 1% of the ocean floor. Sprawling off the east coast of Queensland, Australia, the Great Barrier Reef is not a single reef, but a group of more than 2,800 distinct systems. It stretches more than 1,250 miles north to south and covers 135,000 square miles in total. Culturally, the reef has been a rich part of the landscape for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They canoed, fished it, and shared myths about its creatures for generations. Divers and other tourists descend on the tropical waters of the Coral Sea. Temperatures are warm enough for enjoyable swimming and diving year-round. Peak tourism on the reef is April through November. Take day trips for snorkeling, diving, and whale watching. For more remote locations, you can charter an overnight vessel. For a bird's-eye view, take a flight over the massive reef system, much of which lies close to the surface in clear, warm waters. The decline of coral reefs has been well documented. In recent years, the Great Barrier Reef suffered coral bleaching events that damaged 2/3 of the reef. Sea temperature rise, acidification, and extreme weather are some of the factors putting the reef at risk. Conservationists and the Australian government are working hard to save the Great Barrier Reef, one of the most biologically diverse places on the planet.
In conclusion, I discussed the transformation from the native Aborigines to eventually evolving to a multicultural background of primarily English and Irish settlers. Some were prisoners, which helped shape the language and dialect. Bush food and native meats are mostly the only food considered authentic to the country, while the food continues to evolve as a melting pot of European, Asian, and Pacific influences. Christianity, not surprisingly, is the dominant faith due to early English settlement and the faith of many of the prisoners transported to the country from Britain. Lastly, I discussed how modern-day Australia is defined by the unique architecture which plays into its culture of music in Sydney. I touched on the importance of the Great Barrier Reef and how the Aborigines named its iconic bird the kookaburra. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned a little bit more about Australia.